Why manipulators always win, and you never win a game. Marx knew it. Have you ever felt like you're playing a game of chess, but your opponent is secretly moving your pieces for you? You know the rules, you see the board, but somehow, despite your best intentions, the outcome is always the same: a quiet surrender, a subtle defeat. It's a feeling that gnaws at the edges of our consciousness, a suspicion that the world, and the people within it, operate on a frequency we're only dimly aware of. We strive for fairness, for genuine connection, for a level playing field, yet we often find ourselves outmaneuvered, our motivations twisted, our trust exploited. It's not about overt aggression or brute force, it's far more insidious. It's about the quiet architecture of influence, the unseen strings that pull and prod, guiding us toward decisions that serve another's purpose, not our own. This isn't merely a personal failing or a series of unfortunate coincidences. There's a pattern here, a recurring narrative that plays out in boardrooms, in political arenas, in intimate relationships, and even in the subtle negotiations of everyday life. We witness it, we feel it, and yet, we often struggle to articulate it, let alone defend against it. It's the smooth talker who leaves you feeling indebted, the colleague who subtly undermines your contributions while appearing to be helpful, the system that seems designed to benefit those who understand its hidden levers. Regardless of merit or effort, we are, in essence, often unwitting participants in a carefully orchestrated dance, one where the steps are dictated by unseen choreographers, and our own agency feels increasingly like an illusion. The feeling is one of being perpetually behind, of reacting to moves already made, of trying to catch up in a race that started long before we even knew we were competing. It's the gnawing question of why, despite our intelligence, our good intentions, and our efforts to be ethical and fair, we so often find ourselves on the losing end of interactions, our resources depleted, our spirits dampened, our goals deferred. Is there a fundamental imbalance at play, a systemic advantage enjoyed by those who master the art of subtle coercion and strategic advantage? This script is an exploration of that very imbalance, a deep dive into the mechanisms that allow some to consistently gain the upper hand, often at the expense of others who operate with a more transparent, perhaps even naive, set of principles. We'll be looking beyond the surface-level interactions, seeking to understand the underlying currents that shape our perceptions and influence our choices. It's about recognizing the subtle power dynamics that are not always about overt dominance, but about a more sophisticated form of control, one that capitalizes on our inherent human tendencies and societal structures. The question isn't just why do manipulators win, but rather, what is it about the way our world is structured, and perhaps the way we are conditioned to think and behave within it, that creates the fertile ground for such strategies to flourish and for us to fall prey to them. This journey is not about assigning blame, but about cultivating awareness, about understanding the deeper currents that shape our collective experience. We will embark on a path that seeks to demystify these often invisible forces, to bring clarity to the shadows where these dynamics typically operate. It's an invitation to look at the familiar through a new lens, to question the assumptions we've unconsciously absorbed, and to recognize the subtle, yet profound, ways in which power is wielded and influence is exerted. The aim is to equip ourselves with a greater understanding, not for the sake of cynicism, but for the purpose of reclaiming our agency, of navigating these currents with newfound clarity and resilience. It's about understanding the game, not just to play it better, but to question whether we should be playing it at all, or perhaps, to redefine the rules entirely. The pervasive feeling of being outplayed, of being the perpetual underdog in a system that seems rigged, is not an anomaly, it is, for many, a lived reality. This exploration delves into the philosophical underpinnings of why certain strategies of influence and control seem to consistently prevail, leaving many feeling disempowered and bewildered. We will examine how deeply ingrained societal structures and psychological tendencies can be leveraged, often unconsciously, to maintain existing power dynamics, and how this perpetuates a cycle where those who understand and exploit these mechanisms often emerge victorious, while those who operate with transparency and good faith find themselves repeatedly disadvantaged. This is an inquiry into the very fabric of how influence is exerted and how we, as individuals and societies, often find ourselves on the receiving end of carefully orchestrated outcomes. The core concept at play here is the strategic deployment of what we might call asymmetrical information, a philosophical and practical reality where one party possesses knowledge or understanding that the other lacks, and crucially, leverages this disparity. This isn't about hoarding secrets, it's about shaping the very landscape of decision-making by controlling what information is visible, how it's framed, and what is deliberately omitted. Think of a skilled negotiator who, aware of a competitor's urgent deadline, subtly emphasizes the potential for long-term partnership, downplaying any immediate concessions, while the competitor, under pressure, focuses on the transactional benefit, blind to the deeper leverage being built. This imbalance creates a situation where one side is always operating with a fuller picture, allowing them to anticipate reactions and steer the interaction toward their desired conclusion. Furthermore, consider the philosophical underpinnings of manufactured consent. This involves creating an environment where individuals believe they are making free choices, when in fact, their options and perceptions have been carefully curated. It's the subtle art of framing issues so that the desired outcome appears not only logical but inevitable. For instance, a political campaign might consistently highlight crime statistics in a particular district, coupled with advertisements featuring stern-faced authority figures, creating a pervasive sense of insecurity. This carefully constructed narrative then makes a candidate's platform of increased policing and stricter law enforcement seem like the only rational response, overshadowing other potential societal solutions or the root causes of the issues. The public, bombarded with this specific framing, genuinely believes they are choosing a solution, unaware that the problem itself has been strategically amplified and the solution narrowly defined to serve a particular agenda. Building on this, however, we can see how this asymmetry extends into the realm of psychological anchoring. This is a cognitive bias where individuals rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered, the anchor, when making decisions. Manipulators excel at setting these anchors, often at extreme or subtly misleading points, to influence subsequent judgments. Imagine a salary negotiation where the initial offer, though perhaps unreasonable, is significantly lower than the employer's true valuation of the role. The employee, having been anchored to this low figure, might then feel that a slightly higher offer, still below market value, represents a substantial victory. The employer, by strategically placing the initial anchor, has effectively predetermined the range of acceptable outcomes, making the negotiation appear more favorable to the employee than it truly is, all while retaining a significant advantage. Conversely, consider the subtle erosion of independent thought through the consistent presentation of a singular, dominant narrative. When a particular viewpoint is relentlessly amplified across various channels, media, social circles, even academic discourse, it can create a powerful echo chamber. Individuals may begin to internalize this dominant narrative as objective truth, simply because it is the most visible and frequently encountered perspective. This isn't necessarily overt propaganda, it can be a gradual saturation of ideas, where alternative perspectives are either marginalized, ignored, or presented as fringe or irrational. The result is a populace whose critical faculties are subtly dulled, making them more susceptible to accepting prepackaged conclusions without rigorous independent evaluation, a quiet victory for those who control the narrative flow. Another crucial layer is the exploitation of our innate desire for social validation and belonging. Manipulative individuals often understand that aligning themselves with popular opinion, or leveraging social proof, can be a potent tool. They might present their agenda not as their own idea, but as the consensus of respected figures or the overwhelming will of the majority. This can manifest in business as a manager pushing a new policy by stating, "Everyone is on board with this," or in social settings as someone saying, "All our friends agree that this is the best way forward." This creates a powerful psychological pressure to conform, as deviating from the perceived norm can feel isolating or even socially punitive. The manipulator gains compliance not through persuasion of the idea's merit, but through the subtle threat of social exclusion. A more subtle, yet profoundly effective, mechanism is the manipulation of perceived scarcity. By creating an artificial sense of limited opportunity, time, or resources, those who wield influence can induce a form of cognitive tunnel vision, forcing individuals to act impulsively and often against their better judgment. Think of a high-pressure sales tactic that insists, "This offer is only valid for today." or a networking event that promises exclusive access to influential figures, but only for a select few who register immediately. This manufactured urgency bypasses rational deliberation, tapping into our primal fear of missing out, FOMO, and compelling us to commit without adequate consideration. The manipulator, by controlling the perceived timeline or availability, dictates the pace and nature of the engagement, ensuring that the other party is reacting rather than proactively strategizing. This tactic is particularly potent when combined with the principle of commitment and consistency. Once an individual has made a small, initial commitment, often under the guise of scarcity, they are psychologically inclined to follow through with larger, more significant commitments that are consistent with that initial action. Consider a scenario where someone is persuaded to sign a petition for a cause. Later, they might be approached to donate money or volunteer time for the same cause. Because they have already publicly associated themselves with it, the initial commitment, they feel a stronger internal pressure to maintain that consistency, even if their resources or inclination have shifted. The manipulator leverages this psychological inertia, transforming a minor agreement into a cascade of escalating obligations, all stemming from that initial, subtly engineered scarcity. Furthermore, the strategic withholding of crucial information, a practice sometimes termed information asymmetry, plays a significant role. This isn't merely about not knowing something, it's about the deliberate cultivation of ignorance in others to maintain an advantage. Imagine a complex investment opportunity presented by a financial advisor. If the advisor deliberately omits details about the associated risks or fails to fully explain the fee structure, they create a knowledge gap. The client, lacking this vital information, might proceed with an investment that is not truly in their best interest, while the advisor, possessing the complete picture, benefits from the transaction. The manipulator's power here lies not in superior intellect, but in controlling the informational battlefield, ensuring their own enlightenment while fostering a carefully managed darkness for their counterpart. Consider, too, the manipulation of social norms and expectations. Individuals are deeply social creatures, influenced by what they perceive as acceptable or expected behavior within their communities or professional circles. Manipulators can exploit this by framing their proposals or demands as being aligned with these prevailing norms, or by subtly redefining what those norms are. A manager might suggest a new, burdensome workflow by framing it as the way things are done now or what successful teams are all doing, even if this isn't objectively true. This creates a subtle pressure to conform, making refusal feel like a rejection of group identity or professional standards, rather than a reasoned assessment of the proposal itself. The manipulator capitalizes on our desire to fit in and our fear of appearing out of step. The strategic employment of ambiguity is another powerful tool in the manipulator's arsenal. When terms, expectations, or responsibilities are left deliberately vague, it allows for reinterpretation later, often to the manipulator's benefit. Think of a vaguely worded contract or an informal agreement where key details are glossed over. Later, when a dispute arises, the manipulator can point to their interpretation of the ambiguous terms, which conveniently aligns with their desired outcome. This creates a frustrating situation for the other party, who may have entered the agreement with a clear understanding, only to find that understanding undermined by the very vagueness they initially overlooked. The ambiguity serves as a shield, allowing the manipulator to evade accountability and shift the burden of proof. Finally, let's examine the exploitation of our inherent desire for reciprocity. We are conditioned to feel obligated to return favors, to respond to kindness with kindness. Manipulators can weaponize this by offering seemingly small, unsolicited favors or concessions, creating a sense of indebtedness. This can be as simple as a colleague offering to help with a minor task, or a salesperson providing a small, seemingly insignificant bonus. The underlying intention, however, is to trigger the reciprocity principle, making the recipient feel compelled to agree to a larger request or to overlook a more significant imposition later on. The manipulator strategically invests small gestures to reap larger rewards, leveraging our deeply ingrained social obligation. Now, consider how this applies when you face the subtle erosion of your own agency through the gradual normalization of less than ideal conditions. This is where the concept of boiling a frog becomes a chillingly apt, albeit metaphorical, illustration. If you drop a frog into boiling water, it will immediately leap out. But if you place it in cool water and slowly, imperceptibly raise the temperature, the frog will remain, eventually succumbing to the escalating heat. This mirrors how manipulators, or indeed, systemic forces, can incrementally shift expectations and standards, making previously unacceptable situations seem ordinary through a slow, steady process of adjustment. What might have triggered immediate resistance if presented all at once becomes palatable when introduced in stages. This incremental shift is often achieved through what could be termed framing decay. Instead of presenting a radical change, a manipulator might introduce a series of minor concessions or adjustments, each seemingly insignificant on its own. For example, a company might gradually increase reporting requirements, first by adding a single weekly update, then a daily log, then a midday check-in. Individually, each step might be justified as a minor efficiency improvement. Collectively, however, they can lead to an overwhelming burden of administrative tasks that fundamentally alters the nature of work, draining time and energy that could be directed towards more substantive efforts. The key is that at each small increment, the cost of resistance, the perceived overreaction, the disruption of workflow, the potential for being labeled as difficult, outweighs the immediate benefit of pushing back. Furthermore, observe how this plays out in the realm of personal boundaries. A manipulator might test the waters with small encroachments, a late-night text that expects an immediate response, a casual request to borrow something without immediate return, a slightly intrusive question about personal matters. Each instance, taken in isolation, might be dismissed as a minor social misstep. However, repeated instances create a pattern. By consistently pushing against the edges of acceptable behavior, the manipulator gradually expands the zone of what is considered permissible. The individual, having already conceded small points, finds it increasingly difficult to draw a firm line, as doing so now feels like a dramatic escalation, an overreaction to a pattern they have inadvertently allowed to develop. Consider the psychological phenomenon of adaptation. Humans are remarkably adaptable. We adjust to our circumstances, often without conscious realization. This adaptability, a survival mechanism, can be exploited. If a situation deteriorates slowly, perhaps through a gradual decline in product quality, a steady increase in service fees, or a subtle shift in political discourse, our adaptive nature can lead us to accept the new reality as the status quo. We become accustomed to the diminished experience, the higher cost, or the altered discourse, failing to recognize that we have unconsciously lowered our standards. The manipulator, understanding this tendency, can engineer these slow declines, knowing that adaptation will do much of their work for them. This is particularly evident in how expectations are managed in long-term relationships or ongoing professional engagements. A partner might start by consistently arriving a few minutes late for dates. Over time, this might extend to 15 minutes, then 30. If the other partner continues to accept this without addressing the underlying issue, the expectation has been subtly reset. The original standard of punctuality has been eroded, replaced by a new, less demanding norm. The manipulator, in this context, isn't necessarily acting out of malice, but rather out of an understanding of how behavior patterns, if unchecked, tend to shift, and how initial concessions can pave the way for subsequent, more significant ones. The insidious nature of this approach lies in its subtlety. It's not about a grand, obvious deception, but a series of small, almost imperceptible adjustments. The cumulative effect, however, can be profound, leading to a significant alteration of an individual's circumstances or a fundamental shift in their relational dynamics, all without a single, dramatic confrontation or a clear moment of decisive action. It's the slow drip that eventually wears away the stone, a testament to the power of incremental influence. Consider, too, the subtle manipulation of perceived expertise. Those who master influence often cultivate an aura of authority, not necessarily through genuine mastery, but through carefully curated displays of confidence and specialized jargon. They might intersperse their communication with technical terms, cite obscure studies, or adopt a tone of unwavering certainty, even when their knowledge is superficial. This creates an impression of deep understanding, leading others to defer to their judgment, assuming they possess insights unavailable to the uninitiated. Consequently, Individuals are less likely to question their pronouncements or to seek alternative perspectives, effectively ceding critical thought to the perceived expert. This can manifest in professional settings where a project lead might consistently use complex, industry-specific acronyms and present data in highly technical charts, even when a simpler explanation would suffice. The team members, perhaps feeling intimidated or unwilling to appear ignorant, may nod along, accepting conclusions that are not fully grasped. The leader, by controlling the mode of communication and leveraging the perception of advanced knowledge, can steer the project in directions that might not be optimal, but are certainly aligned with their own, perhaps less transparent, objectives. The illusion of expertise becomes a powerful tool for guiding outcomes without necessarily demonstrating superior reasoning. Furthermore, observe how the strategic deployment of flattery, when expertly wielded, can disarm critical faculties and foster a sense of indebtedness. While genuine praise is a cornerstone of positive relationships, manipulative flattery is calculated, often disproportionate, and designed to elicit a favorable response. A supervisor might offer effusive, almost exaggerated, praise for a minor accomplishment, immediately followed by a request for an unreasonable amount of overtime or a task that carries significant personal risk. The recipient, buoyed by the unexpected accolades, may feel a strong urge to reciprocate the perceived generosity, agreeing to the request without fully assessing its fairness or feasibility. The manipulator leverages our natural inclination to respond positively to positive attention, turning it into a mechanism for securing compliance. This can be seen in social dynamics, where an individual might be consistently showered with compliments and affirmations by someone who, simultaneously, subtly isolates them from their existing support network. The constant validation from the manipulator creates a dependency, making the recipient feel that this source of praise is their primary, or even only, source of positive reinforcement. Consequently, when the manipulator later makes demands or subtly steers the recipient's choices, the fear of losing this vital source of validation can be a powerful motivator for compliance. The flattering words become a silken cord, gently binding the recipient to the manipulator's will. Consider, too, the manipulation of social proof, not just in terms of popular opinion, but in the selective highlighting of endorsements or affiliations. Someone might present their proposal or idea by emphasizing its adoption by a prestigious institution, a well-known figure, or a successful competitor, even if these endorsements are tangential or misrepresented. This creates an implicit endorsement, suggesting that if it's good enough for them, it should be good enough for you. The underlying message is that by agreeing, you are aligning yourself with success and prestige, making rejection feel like a dismissal of valuable association. The manipulator capitalizes on our desire to be associated with positive outcomes and respected entities. This can play out in professional development, where a training program is heavily marketed by showcasing testimonials from highly successful individuals, or by highlighting its accreditation by a renowned body. While these are legitimate markers of quality, a manipulator might overemphasize them, downplaying any potential limitations or drawbacks of the program. The prospect of associating with such success can overshadow a rational evaluation of the program's actual content or suitability for one's specific needs. The manipulator, by curating the presented associations, guides the decision-making process through the persuasive power of borrowed prestige. Now, let's consider how the manipulation of perceived risk can subtly disarm your judgment. This isn't about outright deception, but about strategically magnifying potential downsides of one path while downplaying the risks associated with another, often the manipulator's preferred route. Think of a business proposal where the presenter meticulously details every conceivable obstacle to your alternative strategy: market volatility, competitor response, regulatory hurdles, painting a grim picture of potential failure. Conversely, they might gloss over the inherent complexities or long-term liabilities of their own proposed solution, framing it as a streamlined, low-risk venture. This creates a cognitive bias where you become overly focused on the amplified threats of your own ideas, rendering you more receptive to the seemingly safer, albeit potentially less beneficial, option presented by the manipulator. Furthermore, the subtle art of opportunity cost framing can steer your decisions. Instead of presenting a choice directly, manipulators can frame it in terms of what you lose by not choosing their option. Imagine being offered an investment opportunity that promises a significant, albeit speculative, return. The manipulator might emphasize the lost gains you would experience by leaving your capital in a low-yield account, or the missed chance to get in on the ground floor of a potentially lucrative venture. They aren't necessarily lying about the potential gains, but they are strategically highlighting the opportunity cost of not acting, thereby creating a sense of urgency and a fear of missing out that bypasses a thorough evaluation of the investment's actual merits and risks. Building on this, consider how manipulators can exploit our innate desire for closure and resolution. When faced with ambiguity or an unresolved situation, humans tend to feel discomfort. Manipulators can leverage this by presenting a seemingly simple, albeit perhaps superficial, solution to a complex problem. They might offer a quick fix, a definitive statement, or a decisive action that promises to end the uncertainty. However, this resolution might be designed to serve their own ends, creating a dependency or setting the stage for future manipulation, rather than genuinely addressing the root cause of the issue. The satisfaction of closure, even if illusory, can be a powerful motivator for accepting their proposed path. Conversely, consider the tactic of anchoring by contrast. This involves presenting two options, one of which is deliberately made to seem exorbitant or unappealing, thereby making the manipulator's preferred option appear far more reasonable by comparison. Think of a retail scenario where a high-priced, premium product is displayed prominently, followed by a slightly less expensive, but still costly, alternative. The initial, high-watering price acts as an anchor, making the second option seem like a much better deal than it might objectively be. The manipulator isn't necessarily trying to sell the first item, they are using it to inflate the perceived value and desirability of the second, which is their actual target sale. This psychological maneuver subtly influences your perception of value and affordability. Another crucial layer is the manipulation of perceived scarcity of time. While we touched on urgency, this is more about creating a situation where you feel you have insufficient time to conduct due diligence or to consult with others. A manipulator might present a time-sensitive decision, not with a genuine deadline, but with a manufactured one, implying that delays will lead to catastrophic consequences or irrevocably close the opportunity. This pressure to decide quickly prevents thoughtful consideration, making you more susceptible to accepting the presented option without thorough scrutiny, effectively outsourcing your decision-making to the manipulator's timeline. Reflecting on this journey so far, we've traced the intricate pathways through which influence can subtly reshape perception and guide action, often in ways that elude immediate awareness. It's as if we've been examining the unseen currents beneath a seemingly placid surface, recognizing how submerged forces can dictate the direction of our voyage. The cumulative effect of these observations is a dawning comprehension of how our own cognitive architecture, coupled with the strategic deployment of informational and psychological leverage, creates a landscape ripe for predictable patterns of interaction. As we pivot towards the final reflection, consider the emergent tapestry woven from these disparate threads. It's not a tapestry of overt coercion, but one of subtle orchestration, where the very frameworks of decision-making are gently, persistently nudged. The initial question of why certain outcomes consistently favor particular players begins to yield to a deeper understanding of the underlying mechanisms that facilitate such results. We've seen how the architecture of information, the calibration of emotional responses, and the leveraging of ingrained human tendencies can converge to create a powerful, often invisible, momentum. In light of these insights, the path forward becomes clearer, not in terms of definitive answers, but in the sharpening of our capacity for discernment. The initial bewilderment that often accompanies feeling outmaneuvered can begin to transform into a more grounded awareness. It's akin to a cartographer finally understanding the hidden contours of a familiar terrain, enabling them to navigate with greater certainty. The focus now shifts from simply observing the phenomenon to understanding its implications for our own agency and our engagement with the world. The journey has illuminated the subtle artistry of influence, preparing us for a final contemplation of what this understanding truly means. Drawing these strands together, we see a powerful convergence, the way our inherent psychological predispositions can be amplified and directed, creating a subtle but profound asymmetry in our interactions. The world, in this light, appears less as a realm of random encounters and more as a complex system where understanding these dynamics offers a key to navigating its currents. This exploration has been an invitation to look beyond the immediate transaction, to perceive the broader patterns of influence that shape our collective and individual experiences, setting the stage for a final, clarifying perspective on how we might approach these realities with renewed insight and intentionality. The accumulated weight of these observations naturally directs our gaze toward a concluding understanding, a place where clarity and perhaps a quiet empowerment can be found. The culmination of our exploration reveals a profound truth: the architects of influence do not always wield thunderous pronouncements or overt displays of power. Instead, their mastery often lies in the quiet reshaping of the very air we breathe, the subtle alteration of the landscape upon which we make our choices. We have journeyed through the mechanisms of asymmetrical information, the art of engineered consent, the exploitation of our deepest psychological tendencies, and the insidious power of incremental erosion. What emerges is not a condemnation, but a stark illumination of the pervasive currents that shape our reality, currents that, once understood, can transform our experience from one of unwitting participation to one of conscious navigation. The central message is this: the consistent advantage enjoyed by those who manipulate is not a testament to inherent superiority, but to a profound understanding and application of how human perception and decision-making can be subtly directed. It is a recognition that the game is often won not by playing by the rules we perceive, but by shaping the rules themselves, or more accurately, by shaping our perception of them. This understanding liberates us from the debilitating narrative of perpetual victimhood, replacing it with the empowering possibility of informed agency. The feeling of being perpetually outmaneuvered can, with this knowledge, morph into a keen awareness of the subtle levers at play, allowing us to discern the underlying currents rather than being solely swept by them. This is not a call to cynicism, but to a heightened state of clarity. The true practice begins now, not in a grand gesture of resistance, but in the daily, conscious application of this heightened awareness. It is in the pause before commitment, the question posed to perceived certainty, the gentle yet firm assertion of personal boundaries, and the quiet insistence on transparency. It is in recognizing that our own adaptiveness, our innate desire for resolution, and our susceptibility to social proof are not weaknesses to be exploited, but fundamental aspects of our being that require conscious stewardship. The power to navigate these dynamics does not lie in becoming a manipulator, but in becoming a more discerning, more self-aware participant in the intricate dance of human interaction. The most profound insight is that understanding these mechanisms is not merely an intellectual exercise, it is the first step toward reclaiming the authorship of our own lives, one considered choice at a time.